Oh, I think you're going to like this one. Today, I'm interviewing Jeffrey Newton, who is a technical guy turned sales guy in the MSP space. What's cool about Jeffrey's story is that he worked in big MSPs, comparatively very large MSPs, where they had teams doing all the right action. They had the right tools in place. They had people doing the right activity, but the performance was not there. Many times people think if I just had all these people and all these tools and all these money to throw at it, then my sales would perform. But in Jeff's experience, that didn't necessarily mean performance was guaranteed. So he took this really interesting, technical, almost scientific approach, a forensic approach to figuring out why is this working or not working. And some of the stuff he figured out was really interesting. So I won't hold you back anymore. Let's get into it.
I'm Jeffrey Newton, co-founder of Sift and former, or I guess technically recovering MSP veteran. Spent 18 years inside the MSP space before transferring over as a co-founder to the vendor side.
Jeffrey, I'm so glad you're here, man. Thank you for taking time. We ran into each other at IT Nation and had like a brief conversation and realized that we just needed to talk more.
Yeah.
So I'm super glad you're here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, listen, man, one of the reasons I want to have you on is that you're in the vendor space now, but you were in charge of sales at an MSP and you were in charge of sales at more than one MSP. Can you just talk to us a little bit, explain to the listeners just the high level of like what you did from a sales perspective, what your responsibility was, and a little bit of that journey?
Yeah, absolutely. So I sort of backdoored into sales after a couple of years as kind of what the industry now called the VCIO role, right? So kind of a pre-sales engineer, business consultant of sorts. And what I found was every single rep in the company was taking me on every one of their opportunities as basically the SE. We had the AE/SE thing down. And when you're the SE instead of the AE on that side of things, then you're also on the wrong side of the commission coin. And so when the role opened up to take an AE role at that MSP, I switched. That was my formal transition from the tech side into the sales side formally, and got humbled really quickly because there was a whole lot more to the whole sales thing than just showing up when an AE puts you on stage, account executive puts you on stage. So that was my foray into sales, was as a sales rep. I cut my teeth for about 6 months there before gaining traction quick when I figured out what I was doing wrong. And the whole rest of the time was a learning experience too, but got handed the team, the inside sales folks first. And then within 12 months, it was inside and outside. So there I was responsible for, I think, 7 reps total, including the inside and the outside.
So let's zoom into that a little bit further. So first of all, you're saying AE and SE, and for the listener who doesn't know, AE is an account executive, and SE is a sales engineer.
Yeah.
And so just in case somebody doesn't know what that is, give them the quick, like, what is a sales engineer's function?
Yeah. So the sales engineer's function is really there to hold the space for the business folks that you're talking to and provide clarity around the tech that's going to deliver them their business outcome. And if you need to be technical, you can be, but really it's about facilitating at a very granular level, meeting the audience where they are and helping them understand the decision they're trying to make and how the decision that you want them to make is going to take them closer to their goals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the sales engineer I define as like the bridge between the pre-sales function, like your account executive, and then your operations team, who's actually has to architect a solution that is deliverable, it's achievable, that we can deliver for the price we're saying we can. And that's going to actually resolve the problems that person is having. But you just said it in a cool way, because most of the time I hear people say SE, they're really just techs who are like, the SE's job is to say explain all of the tech. But you didn't say it that way.
No, and that was probably from learned experience, right? So MSP was all I'd ever done. I started on the tech side for the first 11 years. I climbed that ladder, but I was never the smartest tech ever. And I never tried to be. Like, I couldn't pass certifications to save my life, but I could function through the roles perfectly well. And what I came to realize was that it was my ability to unlock the smartest technicians in the room as people to actually want to help me and help me learn and grow and evolve and solve those problems. And so it was just like this stair step of progression through that lens. And ironically enough, that's the same thing. Use the word bridge, and I love that because that's really what my career was. It was like all tech, bridged over into account management, VCIO stuff before the industry really grasped onto that. Not that I was marvelous or anything, it's just the way that I evolved, right? Was with the people side. And then subsequently that opened the door into the sales side. And so I always saw my role as a SE, sales engineer, like if that's the way that we're labeling it and defining it. Like I didn't need to go and show up and talk about all the zeros and ones and widgets and hyperconverge this and flux capacitor that. Like they don't know, nor do they care. All they care about is, did we hit our strategic goal for the year? They being the client, right? And our desire to be able to fulfill what we sold them ultimately. So I looked at that as saying, well, I spent 11 years in all the tech stuff. So I knew with fair confidence how to navigate. I used to call it like the Plinko board, the old, that portion of the conversation where it was like, I could have an honest conversation at an in-depth level with a prospect about, yes, we can do that. No, we can't do that. Or let me better understand what you're trying to accomplish. And here's how it's going to work. And it just sort of evolved pretty naturally into that bridge as you described.
And explain again. So like you're a sales engineer, and then all of a sudden you're in charge of the whole sales function, like the whole sales department. Like what happened there?
Yeah. A couple of things happened there. One, I don't think that that particular sales team at that MSP was really ever looked at strategically. And by that, I mean a strategic function of the business. And by that, I mean having the attitude of how can I make this work? And how is everyone going? Are we all aligned to the same goal? Right. I think it was a lot more designed because I knew it. I was a rep. I was tasked that way. It was like, we all had our quotas. Yeah, we had like pipeline review meetings, but outside of that, it was like a bunch of universal soldiers, right? Just clawing to get to quota, essentially. And everyone did it completely different. There wasn't really a unified message. There really wasn't any standardization. And so as I was still working with the reps in kind of an SE function, even though I was my own AE at that point too, it just sort of naturally evolved with the outside team first. It was the way our working relationship worked, was like nothing was set in stone. Every single opportunity we had, every conversation we had was an opportunity to improve for the next one. And this constant, continuous, iterative improvement was the methodology that we had. And so we would game plan before the calls, we would go execute the calls, and game plan after the calls, right? And even though I was running my own sales motion as just an independent rep, the rest of the AEs on the team never stopped wanting to use me as their sidekick, so to speak, of the SE in their motion. And so it was sort of a natural evolution that it was just like, this is the way sales is going to be done here, where it is a team collaborative approach, and that we're always looking to improve, because at the end of the day, the more we win, whether it's individually or collectively, the company obviously wins more, but also the way everything else was set up, we were all winning too. There was no reason to approach it from a lack mindset. It was just, how can we build the best consistent motion that was trackable? That was one piece, I think, was back to the point of your question. How did I get a team when I didn't have the team first, right? It was just the AE. It was as defined. The president at the time told me it was because I brought a systematic and analytical approach like an engineer to the concept or the delivery of sales. So understanding the whole process was a process, that we were going to measure each component of it. So we knew exactly where we needed to tweak and where and how we needed to adjust in order to get a better result in the end as well. And so I think it was just sort of like the alignment of, they knew me for a long time, said worked there in different capacities. And then the demonstrated success as an AE after I moved from more of that VCIO SE into the team didn't really let go of me. And so it was a very natural progression.
So this is something that I want the listener to really grasp onto, what, like, the underpinnings of what happened here. Because in a second, I'm going to ask about the numbers. I know the numbers are ready, sure, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But before we go there, because the listener might be saying, like, what are we talking about? Mm-hmm. And what was the results? The results were the results. But You said something really interesting to me a couple of minutes ago, that the sales division, the sales department, was
Right.
not being looked at as a strategic investment or a strategic part of the business. And
Yeah.
I'm assuming that that means instead it was really looked at more of it was like, deliver outcomes no matter what. And we're not really going, like, we don't really know how to help you achieve them. That's your job.
Yeah.
Your job is bring us bags of money.
Yeah. It was
Right.
an organization of fixed activities that had to be produced, and ideally the outcome would be there. And by
Uh-huh.
that, like there's a certain number of emails and a certain number of activities and a certain number of opportunities and a certain number of meetings and all that stuff. It was all the science of sales. There's nothing wrong with that. And this organization was large. Okay, it was 100 and at that time when I flipped there, it was about 100 employees, a large MSP, and that's still how it operated. It wasn't until the marriage, if you will, of the science of it, all the metrics that still mattered, but then the art of it. Like that's what I saw and what I brought to the component of the way that we made it work. And I didn't realize that until I became the sales rep, and then realized what I was really doing as the SE was actually bringing the art to it to begin with. And the sales rep was doing all the selling portions of it. I was just there to demonstrate trust and gain confidence and ultimately deliver the result. And so the the way the sales org was built and was operating was just this unintentional swarm of activities. In its own way, it was the buying bodies for bandwidth, but it was just like, hey, let's hire another rep. Let's hire another rep, because one more rep means this many more activities outbound every day, every week, every month, right? And it was just kind of like, well, yeah, that worked until the results weren't there, right?
Right.
Uh,
Right. And what's fun is, like, the average listener to this MSP or to this podcast does not have 100 people in their MSP. But
right.
what you can learn really from this is, oftentimes we say, well, if I can put in the science, as you said, if I can
Mm-hmm.
put in the activity and the infrastructure, then the results will come, which is, depending on where you are in your journey, that could be true and it could not be true.
Right.
We're kind of using the word strategy and the word art,
Mm-hmm.
I think, as synonyms here, which I think is really cool. I think that in this particular case, the strategy and the art are synonymous. But the point is that if you have a technical perspective, like if you think like a tech
Mm-hmm.
and then you try to techify the sales function, you will plateau,
Yeah.
because people are not zeros and ones,
Mm-hmm.
right? And like
Yeah.
sending a sales email is different than firing an executable on a machine, because an
Yeah.
executable, something will happen. It's a given input, given output. If there's an error, that error has a code you can trace, you can
Yeah.
solve. But humans
Mm-hmm.
aren't rational. Humans don't make sense. That's not how that works. So the techification is helpful in some ways to help you scale the revenue operations. But if you want to pull through a lot of results, you have to bring
Yeah.
back in art, in the form of strategy, in the form of art, shall I say it that way,
Yeah.
to make it.
Absolutely.
So what was that pivot point, do you think? Or, I mean, yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, I think you're absolutely right. The way that again, it was sort of like evolving into it. Now, my schooling background, I didn't go to school for IT. I went to school for criminal justice with political science and psychology minors, but I worked in IT to pay for school. And so, like, the psychology piece of my education is the thing that has served me the most professionally. Um, and it really goes to the heart of what you just said. And that is because oftentimes tech people do tech things and they also have tech conversations. And when techs transcend into the sales motion, they tend to come with the default programming of saying, let me tell you everything I know about the topic being discussed, rather than a sales approach to that same concept, which is, let me only tell you the things that you need to know in order to make the informed decision about the topic that we're discussing.
Yeah.
And and I just had to make that natural progression. And I don't know that there was any one epiphany or any one aha moment or anything along those lines. I wish there was that I could point to, but it was really the progression of really being present in the conversations I was having and reading the person or persons on the other side of the table through all the nonverbal communication they were giving me, right? Like, am I
Mhm.
losing them? Are they shutting down? Are they engaged? Are they disengaged? Do they even care? And just doing this beautiful dance of understanding and communication,
Mm.
which ultimately for me is really where the thrill of sales is. It isn't about so much like the signature is the byproduct of doing all the rest right.
Yeah, right. Like true salespeople, like from the outside, people think that true salespeople are motivated by result.
Mhm.
And I wouldn't say it that way. I would say that true salespeople are motivated by reward, but the reward is buried in the actual journey for a real salesperson. The reward is the relationship you build,
Yeah.
the resolutions that you find along the way, the
Hmm.
moments that you win. Like, it's not just like, I hate my job until I get the signature. Now I love my job.
Yeah.
That person will burn out. They probably already burned out, you
Yep.
know, but the real
Yeah.
salespeople are the one who can find, like,
Hmm.
they love, just like a technician loves solving things. Salespeople
Yeah.
love solving things, but what they're solving are these intangible, unspoken things in the human experience of the person
Hmm.
across the table, rather than I need to log in, I need a single sign on with this other
Yeah.
application, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the organization figured out along the way, and it sounds like, I mean, you wouldn't go out, you wouldn't say it, but it sounds like your involvement was a big piece of that pivot culturally on the
Hmm.
sales team. Talk to us
Yeah.
about like the results. What happened on the sales side, on the number side, kind of as a result of that
Yeah.
change?
So at that MSP, when they handed me the team, we were $33,000 behind pace for the year. And we ended up finishing at goal for the year. And that was about 8 months left in the year. But the major turnaround was like, it wasn't like we just pulled rabbits out of the hat, right? Like we looked at the opportunity that was directly in front of us. We had a steady lead flow of inbound leads. We had a process. We built a process. I worked with the team. By the time we worked through the rest of that year, we dropped two, no, just one of the outside reps had left. So it was really just myself and two outside reps that was producing those numbers. But again, it was like that worked out okay too, because it was just more at bats for the team that was running the new play that we were constantly evolving together.
Yeah.
And that was that process there. So then that was the first year. The second year, I think it was around $130,000 in net new MRR. The second full year after that was 142 for production. And so both of those were revenue, like record breaking years by over 2x. And so not only was it like we turned around the year that was sunk, but then we blew out the goals and the records
Yeah.
after that because we never stopped. Like, and I still don't, even in today's motion in a completely different world, we don't stop iterating and looking for ways to improve because we are people and we don't operate in an echo chamber either. Like the market moves, the market evolves, the buying experience changes, the buying triggers change. And so if you're trying to do the same thing that you did even 2 years ago, even really a year ago in your sales process or your sales motion today, and you're going to get different results because so much else has changed outside your four walls. But we get so fixed and so rigid on like, this is the process that I have to put you through. One of the big unlocks I had early on that unlocked those results we were able to produce at that MSP before moving to the other one was actually acknowledging there was a difference between the sales process and the buyer's buying process, right? Like
Okay.
when you enter a sales role, people, well, my experience was everything anchored around the sales process and the activities and the things that you had to accomplish inside the sales process to get the deal done. But nowhere in that particular journey or training or experience or enlightenment was there ever anything that even acknowledged that the buyer is going through their own journey at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. How did you pivot your relationship to make space for the buyer's process without forfeiting control of the sales cycle?
Yeah. The first thing that I did after taking over the team was I threw the word process out because it was about the same time I realized this is what was going on. And so words have meaning and they have power. And the word process was so rigid, it didn't offer any flexibility in a lot of cases as well. So we made one change, which was we no longer had a sales process. We used our sales framework to deliver the outcome that we wanted, because framework was a little softer, but it still
Mhm.
had milestones you had to hit, which was
Mhm.
basically the process before, right? But just that one word, and then the psychology and the leadership around it was, these are the things we have to do to ultimately know we're going to deliver a great product on the back end. But it opened up enough space to breathe where you could invite the prospect in on their journey, meaning maybe it was 2 or 3 meetings it was going to take in between the FTA, or the first time appointment, and the assessment meeting, because that's where
Yeah.
the buyer was at. Maybe it went from first time meeting, barely skipping over the assessment stuff, like all the way down to like solution design and proposal. But you still had these check valves that you had to hit along the way, just because you knew where that buyer was, and you can test to figure out where the buyer is based on a couple of different matrix of the mechanics of the brain when it's making a decision like that, right? So
Right.
it's comes down to emotional safety, and it comes down to the level of awareness they have, and
Hmm.
and then their belief in the your ability to deliver the outcome that you're promising. And if you can turn those tumblers like a dial on a padlock, then you line them up correctly, and then that's where the deals just come through.
And what's cool about what you just said is it's not MedPick, it's not Bant, it's not
You know,
the Sandler Payne submarine. Like there's a
right?
lot of these. Uh, there's elements that must be in place in order for a deal to be successfully structured, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's for many MSPs. That alone is a Herculean effort to figure out how to get budget, authority, need, timing. That's Bant,
Yeah.
right? But what you're describing is like, do they feel safe, and you can
Mm-hmm.
extrapolate from that. Are they telling me the truth, or are they willing to tell me the truth? And if
Right.
the answer is no and no, that means
Mm-hmm.
you know the answer. They don't feel safe.
Right. Yeah. I talk through that as there's 3 levels to every conversation, right? There's the known level, which is I know it and you know it and we're willing to talk about it. There's the unknown, where I know it and you don't know it, but you're willing to talk about it with me if I bring it up to you, Brian, in this case. And then there's the hidden, which is I know it and you don't know it. And if I bring it up, it's going to be contentious or unstable, right? And so you have to know how to navigate and balance getting to the third level. Because if you can't get to and over the third level, then there won't be a deal
Hmm.
either, right? Unless there was a major event, because MSPs also operate in an event driven sales cycle. And that's sort of the get out of jail free card on the buying side, where because of the urgency or the impact or the implication of the event that occurs, and there's really only like 5, maybe 6
Yeah.
that can happen, then like boom, it just goes straight to the finish line. Um,
Right.
but yeah, it's emotional safety first, which sounds weird, right? Sounds steely and woo woo and like all that other stuff, but it's also it's true, and and there's levels to that, right? And you don't,
Yeah.
maybe it's not safe isn't the one word that we use, but it's levels that you have to work down to get there.
Yeah. In mine, I mean, in our world, in Feel Good, we have this, like, I call it the connection chart. So there's this
Okay.
kind of graph that you can climb as you
Yeah.
build more meaningful connection with the person at the other end of the table. The bottom of the graph is the word do, and then it
Cool.
climbs to want, and then need. So the worst way to sell anything is by saying, this is what my product will help you do. It's the lowest level of connection you can form with a person, right? Is their
Okay.
activity. And so oftentimes we have to start there because that's as high up that connection chart as we've been given access. But then
Yeah.
the purpose of the feel good close in my world, or the purpose of this
Great.
of building relationship in sales, is to climb from do to what they want to what they need. Then you can move laterally to, or move sort of diagonally up to either the think realm or the feel realm. This is how they
Yeah.
think, or this is what they feel, on like a
Mhm.
limbic feel, meaning that sublingual sense of right and wrong, gut feeling, safety. This is like, it's what their gut is telling them, not like what their heart is telling them. And then those two converge to the top box, which is what I call the who connection. Who does this person think they are? Or who does this person want to be?
Sure.
If you can draw a correlation between what you sell and who this person wants to become, you can sell anything.
Right.
Which is a powerful tool that can be exploited. But in reality, like, Nike's slogan is just do it. That's not a do slogan. That's a who slogan. Because people who wear Nike are people who get it done.
Yeah.
Apple, think different. People who have the phone that we all have are people who think different. Even though we all have the same product in our pocket, here's to the rebels, the misfits, the square pegs in the round, the greatest marketing monologue of all time. Because he says the people, people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the people who do. Apple, think different. Mm-hmm. That's not a think slogan. That's a who slogan.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep. Yeah, we talk, in my world, I talk through it sometimes as the aspirational identity, right? You have to really elevate, which is ultimately the who thing you're describing too, where people, you can for the most part distill it down to this. People, your prospects, either have a problem that they do not want, or you offer them the promise of a future. They have a problem that they do not want. And then on the other side of that, you offer them the promise of the future they want, but they do not have. Yeah. So those are the poles, right? And then you sit in between. Now, either side, right? Because your prospect's going to be one of those two. They either have problems they do not want that you can resolve, or you offer a future that they want, but they do not have. And either way, you're that bridge between their current state and their aspirational state.
Right.
And then the integrity component of that is knowing the balance of doing and saying what's appropriate in the process of helping them on that crossing the bridge, not by saying all the things that you think they want to hear the answer to, but by knowing that you can deliver on the things you're saying yes to.
Right.
And the rest just sort of falls into place.
Right. I love it. Yeah. We talk in marketing, there's this new, or not really new, I guess, but they say that avoiding loss is twice as powerful as like gain. Like people they'll have the same emotional impact losing a $5 bill and finding a $10 bill. And I don't actually agree with that synopsis. I think that it's just twice as hard to build a connection with who people want to become, but I think it's an order of magnitude more powerful. If you can truly build a connection between what you're selling and who they want to become, I think people will pay anything to achieve their dreams. Sure. You know what I mean? I think that's my perspective.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree, because I think the way that that I've seen that unfold, and I don't remember when I read the book, but it was within the last couple of years, but it was one of Lencioni's book, Patrick Lencioni. It was the Get Naked or Getting Naked, I forget what it was, but the whole core of it was about vulnerability, right? And it wasn't until I read that book through that lens where I also understood one of the things that my style brought to the table in the way we sold was like vulnerability and upfront vulnerability. Because it's absolutely one of the superpowers that's at your disposal that you may or may not even be tapping into because you're too uncomfortable allowing yourself to be vulnerable. Yeah. But there is a magnetic draw to vulnerability where, generally speaking, the person on the other side of it will match your level or at least slightly below. And so it's this imaginary force that you can leverage to traverse those levels that you're talking about on the feel good side faster, right? Because that was kind of one of the other priorities. And maybe I got a little off topic when you were talking about the numbers, because we accomplished all of that in a very short time frame, right? Well, one of the ways that we did that, again, scrutinizing the process and understanding, first, time kills all deals. And second, how can I re-engineer the entire structure of the framework to remove all the friction that doesn't need to be there, right? Because the organization allowed engineers to build the process before, it's sort of like conflicting KPIs, right? I mean, engineers, bless their heart. I can say this because I was one, right? But I guess technician, I won't say engineer, I was a technician on that side of the house. But it was the concept of like trying to engineer or architect for perfection in the process, which just put up all of these hurdles, whether it was time, whether it was money, whether it was solution, whether it was all the things that the buyer didn't need, nor would they get to the point that had any attachment to the identity that they wanted, as we were talking, right? And so,
Yeah.
we took our sales motion from 3 months to 3 weeks by making 2 fundamental changes. Well, if we did that, we collapsed the time frame at which the speed at which proposals went out the door, right? So now we're producing 4 proposals every week versus 4 proposals every 3.5 months. It's like, well, naturally, you're going to start to see some hockey stick action coming out of that, even through just the science.
What I love about this, and I think is really the core takeaway that I've had so far in this conversation, is first of all, we just had a really fun detour where the two of us nerded out a little bit on the empathetic side of sales, because sales is a craft, but sales is a psychological trade, right?
Yeah.
Like human intelligence is the most important form of intelligence for salespeople, not product intelligence, not market intelligence. It's human intelligence, emotional intelligence. That is your currency. That's your superpower in sales. And the reason guys like you and I have had a lot of the career path that we've had is that our industry, and I don't mean this to be pejorative, but our industry tends to be lagging on human intelligence as a whole. The technology industry is not a place you go for empathy.
Yeah.
Fair?
Fair. Yeah.
There's creative industries or whatever, like a lot of other people who the personalities who are drawn towards technology oftentimes aren't the ones who want to sit and hear everybody's story, Yeah. Having said that, though, we had this great detour into talking about that, which is critical. But what the MSP listening to this podcast, I really want you to hear is Jeff's constant commitment to like atomic habits, incremental improvements, and iteration. Because this is something I've known about. I've seen it even in your company, Sift, is your guys' dogmatic commitment to improving.
Yeah.
And a lot of these skills that you've developed, and I hope you're not too bashful because this is turning into a big compliment, but the skills that you've developed, they didn't happen because you were born with all of this information, but it was this quest that you set yourself on early in your career to constantly evaluate and to stay humble and open-handed about the way you did everything. And that opened up the door for you to like constantly evaluate, let things go that weren't working. And you were always open to new ideas, which means those people like that are going to naturally gravitate towards greatness, right? You're going to slowly climb the ladder of success because it's inevitable for people like that to sort of elevate. But can you talk to a little bit about maybe because MSPs are so process heavy. We're SOP fanatics. And even just maintaining the standards of our master services agreements and hitting every SOW and every SLA is demanding. So how does somebody pivot their relationship with process or excellence or whatever towards that sort of, any tips for somebody who wants to pivot towards that improvement mindset?
Sure. Yeah, I think the first thing is you have to give yourself permission to let go of some of that, right? Like you're not going to fall off the edge of the flat earth if you do. I promise you. The second thing, you used the word relationship, and that was the word that was rattling around in my head before you finished the question. And because the question I was going to pose back to that MSP that's listening is, think about what Brian just asked, which we're talking about, like what you need to let go of or what you need to consider doing differently. And let's take it out of the business context for a second. And Mr. or Mrs. Business MSP owner, like think about the most important relationships in your life, those that you have the best connection with. perhaps the ones you can be most vulnerable with, although you don't have to take it there. And if you took out a piece of paper and listed like the top 5 things that came to your mind about what makes that relationship mean that much to you, I assure you process, procedure, and SOPs aren't going to be a component of it. There's probably a social contract involved, right? Like some integrity and some things like that. But now we take that same thing and plop it back into the business context and say, okay, sales is a human to human game. It's not, and your interaction with that human is not win lose, right?
Yeah, right.
The
Right.
interaction is to find the opportunity to win, and that can be mutually beneficial. And so, I, in the one hand, it's like throw the rule book out, accept that it can be a framework, right? Put yourself in a position to win. The one thing I used to say, and that I preached really hard when I was still running and building sales teams in MSP, was there were 2 schools of thought. Engineers traditionally viewed the world through a lens of here are the 100 reasons why this won't work. Great.
Yeah.
Salespeople traditionally view the world through a lens of how can I make it work? Great. When you combine those 2 people, which can be the same person, because this is like the absolute component of a trade secret to my success in sales, because again, I wasn't ever the smartest tech guy, was building a relationship with the technical people by asking that one question. The same person that gives me all 100 reasons why this won't work, I instead say, but Brian, how can we make this work? 9.5 times out of 10, they would give me a far better option than I could come up with on my own. And I could package that up with the relationship I'd already built with the individual that I was selling it to and pull it across the finish line. So, like, to the MSPs that are out there, one, ask yourself that question. How can I make this work? Like, print it out, put it on a sticky note, put it on your monitor, put it on your wall, wherever it is, because when you find yourself caught and trapped in that doom loop of the 133 reasons why this won't work, I promise you, the supercomputer stuck between your ears will provide a better outcome if you just ask it a different question.
Yeah.
And it was just that simple because it stopped the thinking enough to say, okay, back to your question about atomic habits and like just continuously and relentlessly looking to improve, like refuse to settle,
Yeah.
right?
For those of you listening, you can't see the art on the wall behind me. But Jeff, did you even notice what this thing
No,
is behind me?
no, I didn't read it. Yeah, but I see it now.
I have a frame on my wall that says, "This is going to work." And that's my mantra when I started my business. And there was like 2 ways that, like, there's whatever. I don't want to get into a pitch for what I do, but there's
Sure.
2 schools of thought in like sales coaching and consulting. One of them is basically, I'm going to turn people into jackasses and I'm going to make them like rageaholic, absolute winners who are fueled by insecurity. And I'm going to use shame to motivate people to work as hard as possible. And that's going to move the needle. And then the other extreme is I'm going to be so people pleasing that I'm going to only tell people what they already want to hear and go full self-help. And the result is that they might like me, but they will never change. Those are the 2 types of consultants or coaches you can get. And I'm sitting here looking at this going, there's no way this is the only option. Like, why can't we be normal and have a healthy relationship with growth without it having to be motivated by what's wrong with me, right? Or without having to say I never have to change, or I have to change because I'm garbage. Like, it could be something in the middle. But my mantra was, dude, this is going to work. As every time I would iterate and iterate, because those other 2 things move the needle. Because that people like to buy things that reaffirm the things they already believe. But that's hard when your job is to change people's beliefs. That makes it hard for them to want to buy it, right? And so, anyway, this is going to work is my mantra. It's another way of saying, how can I make this work? Because I'm like, I know that this will work, but it isn't current. But that means that it's just not done. So I'll keep infecting change until it works.
Absolutely. I think one parallel that I saw true, again, from myself when I sat in the technical seat all the way through to when I was no longer, but every other technical folk that I worked with as well, And this is one of the things that service managers bash their head against the wall on too, right? It's the same intrinsic motivation that you have, technical person, that doesn't allow you to stop working on that ticket even though you have exhausted your capacity to resolve it, is really underpinned by this fear of failure. It's the fear of failure by saying, I need to escalate this. I need to go ask my other, someone else about it. I got to Google some more. I don't want to admit that I'm wrong or that I don't know to my client that I'm working with. And it is the biggest fallacy and the biggest death trap in a service-based business as well, because you're actually doing a disservice to everyone, to yourself, to the client, to the end user, to the business, to your peers, like all the people that could be coached and trained in the process, like the whole thing. That's the dichotomy. It's creating, maybe not failure, that might be too harsh, but it's certainly the pitfall that shouldn't be there. And to tie that back into sales, I think that's very similar to what we just described, which is change is uncomfortable and that's okay. But the fear of change, the fear of failure is sort of that. It's the voice inside your head that's prevented you from doing the thing. And the fastest way to tell that voice to shut up is to start working, like to get into motion, to take the action, to do the thing.
Yeah.
And that's one of those other unlocks is like count down 3, 2, 1 and go. Don't give yourself 4.
Ugh. I love it, Jeff. This has been really fantastic. I can't imagine somebody could listen to this and not be motivated or not have some new ideas or outlooks. Just in case anybody doesn't know, tell us real quick, like what you're doing right now and how an MSP might, find you.
Sure. Yeah. So at Sift, we've built the world's first voice to PSA platform, but it's really the first intelligent automation platform using the interface of your voice. So in a world where you just say, hey, Sift, create a ticket, put it on this board, here's the issue, blah, 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 brain dump, and it's done. Or you're a field tech walking out of the building and you just say, hey, Sift, I was on site at Acme Corp for 3 hours and 11 minutes. I did all these things, close the ticket, and it just takes care of it. So if using your voice to interact with the business systems that you leverage sounds interesting, you can find me at jeff@sift.ai or sift.ai for the website. LinkedIn is the only platform I'm on. That's where you can find me.
Sweet. Jeff, thanks again for being on, man. I'm looking forward to hopefully more conversations like this with you in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate it, Brian.